Day 6, 11 Days of Remembrance. I thank the veterans so I could do these videos. Alright, let's get to the next chapter, shall we? Life in the Reich. Training and persecution in occupied Europe. Shortly after Marshal Pétain signed the Armistice with Hitler, generals 49-year-old General Charles D. Crew flew to London from Bertrix, passing over a sunken British troop ship in the Bay of Biscay. At 6 p.m. 18th June 1940, the future leader of the Free French Army made his famous radio speech to the French people, a call to arms received with dismay by the new Vichy government. Whatever happens, the flame of France's resistance must not and cannot die, he said. Meanwhile, in Paris, a triumphant Hitler was visiting the tomb of Napoleon. I am grateful to face, he said strongly, although acts of genocide had already taken place in occupied Poland, the country people of Western Europe were still unaware where to expect or their new overlords. They were not left in the dark for long. The Nazi commissioner of Holland, Arthur Britain, promised to rein Dutch laws where possible, but warned urgently, of course we do not consider Jews to be Dutch under Nazi occupation. French citizens had no right to listen to the BBC, read non-Aryan or subversive literature, and send cables or travel freely. They had to abide by a 7 p.m. curfew. In Holland, on the other hand, the royal was excused from street names, and prayers and priests were severely forbidden to preach on the text of Psalm 130. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee, O Lord. Further note to add insult to injury, the people of Norway were told they would have to pay the cost of the Nazi occupation. There were acts of passive resistance. Norwegian history teachers went on unrenewed strike, and Danish students supported the colors of the RAF. The Danish king even sent telegrams of sympathy to police who had been warned in a riot involving 300 local Nazis. But these shows of outrage were concerned had small effects and could sometimes backfire. When the members of the Norwegian Supreme Court resigned in protest a Nazi administered justice, they were simply replaced by more amenable factions. At the same time, the coalition began to step forward. One of the most famous was the Norwegian Vikingus. As the Nazi invaded his country in 1940, Kuslin took his way into a radio studio and announced that he had assumed control. Though Hitler got rid of him 6 days later, he was reinstated as a puppet leader in 1942. The governments of conquered countries, no matter how distasteful they found, the Nazis were in an incredible position. Every official measure had to be taken with Nazi consent. It is unlikely that Marshal Pétain himself realized the full progression of the social path of cooperation. The Vichy government was soon forced to pay for the German occupation of northern France. while Britain chose deputy Pierre Laval began to concert openly with Jacques in an attempt to side the old warrior. For ordinary men and women, too, the price of occupation soon became clear. By the end of 1940, the first telegram arrived in Warsaw, announcing the deaths of family members in concentration camps. Christians and ethnic unbearables were similarly shot. Non-Germanic people were forced en masse from their homes to make way for incoming Aryan families. When a German soldier was shot and killed in the Paris metro on 20th April 1941, Hitler's 52nd birthday, 22 civilian hostages were executed as reprisal. The fate resounded on posters throughout the city. In London, a number of organizers were formed to subvert Nazi rule. The Special Operations Official (SOE) was the vice president of their mission. Churchill told his Minister for Economic Warfare, Han Dalton, was to set Europe ablaze. The SOE began sending the Jesuit agents to Europe to form links with emergency resistance groups. Radio broadcasting with ultimate high priority. The BBC and the British Foreign Office cooperated in the Corporation of the European Service, a mouthpiece for the exiles of the occupied countries, and an Israel director, Newsom, was in charge of broadcasting 3 networks in more than 20 languages. Newcomb was confirmed that wartime news was most effective as propaganda when it contained a moral core. Would you risk your life to listen to that? He scrolled on, official demanding that those Europeans who listened and dirting to illegal wireless device that true. It is not certain to show ourselves smart by exposing lies, and the Nazis stripped by reducing themselves to company. Newcomb wrote, "We must go much further and show that the frauds are inevitable measure of a fraudulent system, of a system which is a fake to its very core, a shame which by its very nature cannot endure." For the part, the Nazi propagandists were Harnsberg both by their finance, political inner finance. Hitler himself ruled at one point that the name Winston Churchill should never be used without the Compton whiskey drinking Newcomb. Also until the V for Victory campaign, first used by the BBC Belgian service at the beginning of 1941. Within weeks it was clear that the campaign had been an enduring success all over occupied Europe. These symbols were beginning chalked on walls, while taxi drivers honked and signatured the true of the campaign. It was that Goebbels had a successful attempt to co-opt the claiming V stood for the old German word Victoria. He ordered the large V symbols to be hung from the Eiffel Tower. The European service reported that the kind of the truth said that the German V stood for Victoria Prosecution. Alright, let's go to the next chapter, shall we? Mussolini's March. Italian defeats in Greece and Africa. Mussolini's main resort in declaring war on Britain and France was his fear of missing out on a chair at the peace conference. Is a vote to people against struggle people on the threshold of the decline. It's declared on June 10, 1940, recorded by his bombast, tortured Italian youths were in the streets shouting, "Nice Korsgaard turn shoes." Julius of the grains made by the fascist ally in the northern Europe, Mussolini unwisely manufactured a war with Greece. On 28th of October, Italian troops in summer uniforms crossed the frontier into a rendered battlefield and initially ran into difficulties with the Greek army, which pushed his infantry soldiers back into Albania. Even so, Mussolini's entry into the war was a threat to British participation in Egypt and the Sudan, as there were large Italian armies in Libya and East Africa. There are only about 50,000 British and Empire troops could 500,000 Italians. To protect Egypt and the oil fields of the Middle East, at the height of the Battle of Britain, Churchill sent a third of Britain's tanks there. Where they reached the destination, British forces under General Sir Oswald Riley and Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham launched pre-emptive strikes against the Italians. On the 11th of November, planes from the British aircraft carrier attacked the Italian fleet in Torino, Harbor, destroying half of it while on the 7th of December a small British Empire force under General Duncan O'Connor swept through a gap in the Italian lines and took Tobruk and Edinburgh, destroying 10 Italian divisions, taking 130,000 prisoners and stranding only 438 casualties. This extraordinary operation was crowded one of the fastest tank advances in modern times, while the 4th Armored Brigade rumbled 170 miles in 33 hours to cut off the retreat of the Italian tanks. But the events were acquired in one of his worst decisions of the war. Churchill ordered O'Connor not to press on and take Torino. The Italians expected him as a winning moment. He had decided to transfer most of the garrison in Tobruk to Greece to protect the Balkans from possible Nazi attack. Realizing the control of the Middle East oil fields would affect the outcome of the war, Hitler then interfered on Mussolini's behalf. On 12 February 1941, the German general Erwin Rommel was transferred to Tripoli as a tank division. The start of the world would later become the African Corps. Rommel had division regarded himself in France the previous year, had attracted Hitler's notice. When he arrived in Africa, he said so again, supporting that now this was British forces at Tobruk on 30th of March. He took the part remaining the General O'Connor prisoner. Meanwhile, Hitler had decided he would have to occupy Greece to threaten the oil fields in the Black Sea and Middle East. He wanted assistance from Bulgaria and neutrality at least from Yugoslavia, but the so-called pact with Yugoslavia collapsed after 2 days when the Prince Regent was disbanded and the Fourth Regent was put on the throne. Instead, with a week, the Wizard had destroyed the Yugoslavian Yugoslav army, and the country was beginning dismembered with the help of invading Italians and Hungarians. Belgrade was flattened by the Luftwaffe. In Greece, British intelligence was to be threatened by the under-resistance campaign in Norway and the Prussian victory of Dunkirk. Of the 62,000 British Empire and Greek troops deployed there, 50,000 had to be evacuated in the face of the German advance. Among the avenged were the Greek government and the king. Much of the Middle East was now threatened. Iraqi troops attacked the British air bases around Baghdad, and the Vichy government allowed Germans to use their air bases in Syria. Their one bright moment for the Allies occurred at the Battle of Cape Breton on 27 March. Helped by raiding of Italian naval codes, the British Mediterranean fleet ambushed and eventually destroyed an Italian naval force. The British troops evacuated from Greece, now in Crete, defended from air bases 300 miles away in Egypt, believing their forces to be relatively safe now because the Royal Navy controlled the sea. Their leaders did not anticipate a threat from the air. Cannot understand nervousness. Am I not the least anxious about airborne attacks? So note the Allied commander, New Zealand General Sir Frederick Freiberg, before the first reports of German paratroopers came through on 20th May. In fact, 3,000 had landed on the island, taking strong points and hitting major beach landings. Victory in Crete and through the turning point of the war, signaling Churchill, but it's too late. Confused and demoralized, the British withdrew to the island's southern beaches, where they were evicted to Egypt by the Royal Navy, but the 3 cruisers and 6 destroyers were sent by German dive bombers. The evacuation in the panic, as many as 13,000 British troops had to be left behind. Possibly through the Crete operation had been the Germans also submitted heavy losses. Hitler therefore rejoined plans, but Burley, the airborne commander, General Croat, sent on to use the same paratroop tactics to capture Cyprus and the Suez Canal. The viewer might have been wise at that point to expect all confusion in the Middle East. Their guide had been wrong in believing that Vichy forces there would answer his call to turn on the Axis forces, and British and French troops found themselves fighting each other in Syria. On the other hand, a group of Free French Foreign Legionnaires, based by the Italian and Air Brigade in the Libyan desert, broke out and, after fierce fighting, reached the British lines. That included the future French Prime Minister Pierre Michel. In East Africa there was no such confusion. British forces were actively driving out the Italians, and the Italians' commander, the Duke of Astrano, surrendered there on 19th May. 2 weeks before that, the Emperor of Azerbaijan held session, was flown back to his capital, Azerbaijan, accepted by the according to British General Leader Oils from but in Libya, Royal's counterattack on Ramil, known as Operation Battle Axis, was halted by the Germans. Destructive use of 88mm anti-aircraft guns against the lightly armored British tanks. On 21st June 1941, Churchill ordered General Sir Claude Asgren to make way for General Ways as Allied commander in the Middle East. Alright, this concludes day 6 of 11 Days of Remembrance. If you see a veteran, walk up to them and say thank you, and if they're having a bad day, give them a coffee, and yeah. Thank you to the veterans. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be able to make these YouTube videos, and I wouldn't be able to read books freely or do whatever I want. So, thank you. Thank you, and this concludes the 6th day of 11 Days of Remembrance.